to invest. So it's a partnership between the private sector and the public sector. And I think for the government, it makes a lot of sense. For areas where you think it's financially sustainable to attract private sector. Let's start with two things. The government budget is not enough for infrastructure investment. It's not enough anywhere in the world, but perhaps outside of the Middle East. Most places, you need private investment. Private capital is orders of magnitude bigger than government capital. So let's start with that. Especially in Nigeria, private capital is essential to our development. The government will then decide which areas are economically viable for which the private sector will play, and then the other areas the government will have to play. So if you look at how many airports are owned by governments in Europe, not many. Most of those things are concessional and owned by private sector. There are a lot of toll roads that are owned by private sector. Water resources, sewage treatments in New York City, in some of these places are owned by private sector. So if you look at some of these areas, the reality is the private sector will only go to areas where they earn a reasonable risk-adjusted return. And in many places, when the government approaches some of these projects as a social good, they don't really drive the right business model because the approach is different. So the private sector will look at areas where they cut out waste, areas where they will put the right business model. And these are areas where we need to encourage the private sector to invest. It's a partnership that is essential for the development of infrastructure in this country. Yes.
Okay, but let's look at the benefits of the SWF to the economy. Is it just the central part of the economy that's going to benefit? And there are those out there who will say, well, this is just, you're talking English. Can you tell us something that will put food on the table of the average Nigerian? So what are the benefits of this to the Nigerian?
Sure. When capital comes, it creates jobs. When it creates jobs, it puts food on your table. So watch for some of the investments we'll announce before the year is out.
What about in terms of government benefit? Is it just the central government? The structure of Nigerian economy is just central tippers down to every other person. So how's it benefit?
Well, the last time I checked, Central is a small physical area in the country. There are 36 states that actually constitute, and the Central is not the FCT, right? Everything else is in states. Yeah. So these investments will not be made in the clouds. They will be made in states. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether they're in states or it's about how many people do we employ when we make these investments. That is what it's about.
Do you intend to take a tally of that? I mean, to be able to say significantly this is how much the SWF has been able to contribute in terms of employment to the country?
Oh, yes. Yes, I mean, okay, so there are 12 projects in our pipeline today, of which hopefully we'll probably execute about 5 of them. Between now and the next 18 months, I'm hoping I'll start executing 5 of them. Of those 12 projects, I think 4 are greenfield. They are medium-sized projects that I think you can easily measure because they didn't exist before we started them. And you can easily measure how many people they employ, ranging from small, low-level employees all the way to highly skilled labor. So that is a very simple metric. 2, we can easily measure how much we put in, how much we attracted from outside of the country to create this level of employment. So these are very simple metrics. In some areas it will be difficult to measure because when you put up a factory to manufacture, and again, I'm not trying to be opaque, but we have partners we're co-investing with, and they have their own announcement time frame as well. So we will announce these projects once we're ready to announce them. But the point I'm making is, when we put some of these projects in place, there will be direct employment, there will be indirect employment in the area. There will be foreign capital that will co-invest with us. And this is one of the key things we will have put in together. That's why we have signed some of these collaborations, which is we put in $1, you help us with 20 cents, you put in another 15 cents, and then we kind of grow up the entire capital base. So you can measure some of those metrics. You can. In other countries, you can measure them, and I think we're expecting to do that here.
Are you bogged down by any political constitution? Because time and again, when you see all sorts of headlines about the SWF, the group that wants it, the group that don't, other investors also see these things. Does it affect your performance?
In some places, yes. In most places, no. People understand that this is always a very tricky exercise. And it's interesting now that we have suddenly seen new SWFs created, mostly in Africa. We have 2 things happening. We have a young democracy, and we're still trying to figure out certain things. And then you are trying to, we also have big infrastructural deficits, and everybody has their view as to how they want to solve it. So there will always be a debate about how and who does it. Those debates will exist, and I don't expect them to go away. Okay, most of our partners understand that, and the reason is because they've seen the same debate play out in places like Angola, Gabon just started one as well recently. It's a very natural debate everywhere. But most of our partners take a view that says, listen, if you guys can keep at this for 5, 10, 15 years, you'll have a very, very sizable fund. We'll be there with you throughout the way, and we're going to hold your hands and help you through it. I went to a recent event in Canada where there were 40 CEOs and CIOs of the world, Sovereign Wealth Fund. The only one invited from Africa was Nigeria. And the idea was they sat around a big table, and people were putting their ideas on the table, and other people were, either taking it up and deciding to co-invest with them. There was a big interest to co-invest with Nigeria, big interest to co-invest with Nigeria. And I think, and this was also in the middle of some of the events that you mentioned where people are, having all sorts of views as to the SWF. Not one person raised that as a concern. I was the person that said, aren't you people concerned about some of these headlines? They're like, no, we understand. One of them said to me, I come from the Middle East, I understand exactly what you're going through. We went through the same. Just show us ideas that we think can make money for us, and we can come and help you develop your country.
All right, Mr. Uche Orji is the Managing Director, Chief Executive Officer of Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority. Thank you for coming on today.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Well, back in just a moment. Please join us again. All right, then welcome back. Mr. Pascal Odigbo joins us today. He's an economist and continuing our focus on investing, the sovereign reform, the performance of our economy. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you. You'd like to leave me an economist. I'm a financial analyst.
I don't know why that keeps coming up. But maybe I'm just so interested in these economic matters.
Yeah.
But looking at this again, when you see certain policies against Nigerians who are supposed to travel to other countries, and then when you get there, you ask yourself, well, I don't blame you because I'm coming to your country. They get emotional about this, but the stark reality is that if we don't invest here, who will? If we don't create that climate, who will? Because you were in the National Assembly to make some recommendations about how the country can move forward, get the economy running, but then it comes down to investment.
Yeah.
Are we making any progress?
Yeah, well, if you don't make, if you, as a human being and as a nation, as a country, the best ways to go is forward. If even stagnation is going backward, because those that we are with will not be, will have moved forward. Now, thank you very much. Now, I think that, if you want to attract foreign direct investment, if you want people to invest in your environment, what people will always look for is how much of this is coming from you. In international business, it's called counterpart. If we were to do business with the International Monetary Fund, they will call it what they call counterpart funding. How much of yours are you committed to the project? If you go to a bank for say, a fund, for a business, they'll ask what percentage of this project is coming from your sweat. That is always a measure of your faith in the business. It's always a measure of your commitment in the business. So things like sovereign wealth fund, you know, is something I think is